Yes, I'm talking to you. This intro's a little different, isn't it? I am a little confrontational, and I apologize for that. But this month is the fundraising campaign / plea / urge / I can't think of any other words for 100 Words or Less, the podcast. If you have been checking out the show for a while and have not donated, I urge you to do so. This is obviously a very mom and pop shoestring budget operation here, but I am trying to encourage you to vote with your dollar. Everybody asks for your money, from friends to parents to movies to video games. There are so many things competing for your attention. So the fact that you're tuning into this and my voice is in your ears right now is really, really meaningful. In turn, I want your help. I want you to go to 100wordspodcast.com. On the right side of the page, you have two options. You one-time donation. I could care less. If you give $1, that's fine. That dollar means so much to me. That basically says, yo, I like what you're doing. Keep doing it. Not only is it a vote of confidence, but obviously it's a financial thing as well. So, I mean, people have been really, really kind so far to the show. And this whole month of November, I am making a more concerted effort, a outgoing plea to you, the listener, to keep ramping this thing up, because I just have so many cool ideas that I want to be able to invest in. And through your help, I will be able to do that. So like I said, visit 100wordspodcast.com, right side of the page. You will find a donate button for a one-time donation, or you can also find a recurring monthly subscription sort of thing. If that's your bag, you'll find that link also directly below the donate button. So one of two options. I appreciate it. So let me clear my voice. Now we're in the normal portion of the show. Hey, how's it going? Welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. Pretty subtle shift, right? So thank you very much for checking this out. And I have a very important guest, fun guest, all of those things. I was just trying to think of the best word to describe this. But basically, this is a combination super, super old friend and a really interesting life path. So the guest this week is Nick Bogardus, and most of you will have no idea who this person is, which is fine. And that is the purpose of this show, to hopefully educate you. So Nick, I went to high school with this guy. He graduated a few years before me, but he also helped many bands in the music industry from a management perspective. He managed Cold War Kids for a little bit. He managed Thrice. He managed Rufio. He managed a lot of other artists that are just totally escaping my head right now, but we talk about it in our interview. And Nick transitioned out of the music industry, and he currently, right now, is a pastor here in Orange County. And we talk about the parallels of early tour life. Playing in front of 20 people is basically the same exact thing as starting up a church and bringing people into what it is that you're doing. So we'll get there in a minute. Let's get some fun pleasantries out of the way, and then we'll talk to Nick. So there's a donor that I would like to highlight, because I am going to absolutely butcher his name, and that's okay, though. Sarchev Kirill, Russian donor. Thank you so much for contributing like you did, and I really appreciate that. So, like I said at the top of the show, please donate. There's no other way of saying it. I need your money, and I would love to turn that money into cooler things for this show and bringing you better guests. PropertyofZach.com, our media partner. Self-indulgent, I know. I have this platform, so I'm going to do it. I am getting a vinyl discography together with the kind people at Other People Records for my old band, Taken. And you can pre-order that at bit.ly.com/Taken preorder. Just dive into that. If you were a fan of anything that is melodic and or heavy, you probably may like this. And we're playing some shows in the Southern California area. One of them is announced. One of them we're keeping secret right now. But December 19th at the Glass House with Misery Signals, that will be a show we will be playing. And I look forward to doing that, because playing shows is fun. That's why we all kind of are surrounded by this thing, because we like to go to live musical events. Anyways, all that stuff out of the way. I think I set up Nick in an appropriate way. But I was just really excited to have this discussion, and Nick is so prepared. He like actually the night before our interview, he kind of went through and sort of diagrammed, not like points of his life, but basically he says, I forget a lot of things. So I need to kind of lay it out in order for me to remember how things kind of went in my life. And I was like, I really appreciate that, because, there's something to be said about preparation. So Nick is one of those guys that he's just always been a very positive influence on my life. And I'm sure you have those friends that, have just always existed in your life and always come in at very interesting and opportune times to either help you out or offer a sound piece of advice. And Nick has been that person in my life. And, I'm just so thankful that he is there for me in that perspective. And he's just been very successful at all the things that he has kind of tackled in his life, and especially stepping away from a music industry career that, could have sustained him for another 10 to 15 years. But he decided to step away from that because he felt a calling elsewhere, and his relationship with God was more important than any sort of music industry pursuit. So it's a pretty awesome story. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Nick, and I will talk to you after the show, if any of you still even listen to that. I say some pretty rad stuff in that last part, so if you're missing out, man, I feel sorry for you. But anyways, here's Nick. You've served such a weird role in my life. Like, in the sense of, we weren't really friends in high school. I knew of you and you knew of me, but we existed because you were 2 grades ahead of me. It's a weird combo of a guy that plays football and is ska. It was like, it's a weird juxtaposition. I admired it because you were unapologetic about it. You were just like, well, that's kind of me, Yeah. And so I was like, oh, that's cool. Because obviously there weren't any bands at our school. Uh-huh. So I was like, oh, that was cool. It was like when you reached back out to me, I think it was, you'd graduated. I think maybe I was a junior, maybe a senior, where you reached out to me. You were like, hey, do you want to come to a Warped Tour to take photos for this piece that I'm going to do in Trans World Skate?
That's right.
Yeah. And it was apropos of nothing. You were like, oh, Ray's into photos. And you've always done that to me. I haven't spoken, whatever. We don't speak for a year. And then it was just so interesting to have you reach out and be like, hey, pluck you out of this. And I'm going to throw you into this thing where I was just like, I'm not qualified to take photos for this.
Do you know who it was? Was it Jimmy Eat World or?
Oh, we also, no, that's true. We also did. I think I was just taking photos, and then we also interviewed Jimmy. I just sat there silently while you interviewed the drummer.
Zach, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so
it's funny.
I don't know. It was just so interesting to see, because I'm sure you have those people in your life that maybe wouldn't necessarily view yourself as being close, mm-hmm. but they've always kind of randomly helped you out, or I don't know. It was just
totally.
You've served that function where it's just like that's just weird. Because it doesn't happen with a lot of people, but then it's for the 1 or 2 people in your life where it does, where it's just
I got my tentacles on you.
I know, just and whether or not you've deliberately done this, I feel like it definitely is a part of your personality. Where it's when you did reach out to me, you're always coming at me with something cool rather than, hey Ray, can you help me out with this? Yeah. That could happen later, Yeah. But it was never. I don't know. Has that always been? You've always seemed like a helper. Is that a fair estimation?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good estimation, man. That's very kind. Thanks. I've always loved. I think your description of my high school days was pretty good because I was thinking back as getting ready for the interview, and I was like, right. I was probably the kid that most punk rockers hated. Right? Yeah, I was the Christian surfer, football playing,
right.
Kid who was going to shows. I shouldn't have been around all that stuff, but I was, and so I'm. Yeah, we got to do some fun stuff together, and I think that's always been one of the things that I've loved to do is bring people together for stuff that we believe in,
right?
And to do it well together. I just love it, man. And so when I look through the story of my life, that really is the role I've played most of the time is gatherer or connector. Or
Yeah.
Hey, let's do something awesome, and
right?
Do it together.
Yeah. So were you born and raised here in Southern California?
Yeah, I was born in Duarte.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was born in Duarte out there, and then we lived in Long Beach for the first maybe 6 years of my life, 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
In the sketchy part of Long Beach. I don't even remember the name of the neighborhood right now, but
right,
I just remember it was pretty gnarly. We got out of there after some garage exploded. I don't know. It was something crazy.
Right. Usually when garages explode, that's a sign to get out of there.
Totally.
They're not doing anything good in there.
No. Nothing good is happening before an explosion.
Right.
And then we moved to Orange. Then we moved to Lakewood.
Okay.
for a few years. And then we moved to Orange County my freshman year of high school.
Immediately went to Orange Lutheran, right? Like,
Correct.
Was that your first? Okay.
Yeah.
You have a younger brother,
Yeah.
and he was in my class.
Right.
And it was so funny because I wouldn't call him a friend either. He was just an acquaintance. He was a dude that existed. Like, we kind of were in two separate worlds. But because our high school is obviously so small, you had no choice but to be like, oh, like, yeah, he's cool. Like, because I was more directly related to him, there was always this dichotomy that I felt between both of you, and I've obviously watched it play out throughout your lives of just like, because he was just always like, oh, Tom, like, dude, this guy's a genius. Thomas is so smart.
Oh yeah.
And it was like, and then here's like a goofball older brother.
What are you saying, dude?
Right. I just, where, like, I'm sure, like, when did that sort of, relationship start, or not even relationship, but when did that, sort of like polar opposite, like, oh, Nick's kind of, the goofball, and like Thomas, like, he's the really smart one. Not saying that like your parents fostered that.
Yeah.
But that was just kind of like the dialogue.
No, we've always been wired very, very differently.
Yeah.
My brother is now a philosophy professor. He's brilliant. I have tons of respect for the guy. He's just awesome. I think I played more of the like defender, protector role, older brother.
Sure.
So I was always trying to bring him along to play with our friends and, go shoot BB guns and play war and, do things brothers do, go surfing and,
Sure.
and do all that. And so there wasn't really I don't think I sensed that how
narrative.
different we were.
Right. Yeah.
Until a little later in life, like when he went to college and, no. Actually, I distinctly remember.
Okay.
Well, I don't know how much, I don't know if you want me to tell.
Of course.
This one on the podcast, but
Yeah.
I was going to college. He was still in high school.
Right.
Okay. And I had this professor in college, in my a junior college.
Okay.
And it was a biology class.
Okay.
And every day he would just go on ranting about how if you don't believe in evolution, like, you believe in magic.
Okay.
I just distinctly remember that.
Right.
And I go home to my brother, who was at that time interested in going the biology and med school route. Mm-hmm. And I was like, hey, he keeps saying this. And so my brother was like, let me go to class with you. So I brought him, my high school brother, to my college class. Right. And the teacher again makes some hyperbolic comment about if you don't believe in evolution, you believe in magic. And my brother just slowly raised his hand. And I looked over him and I was like, oh my gosh, what's he going to do? Right. He's going to get me kicked out of this class. Yeah. And he just debated the teacher and into a corner. Like,
really?
You wouldn't believe. It was the first time I was like, it was like Good Will Hunting, where I was like Ben Affleck. I was like the goofy dude in the sweatsuit.
Right.
Was like behind the brother going like, yeah.
Way to go, dude.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I remember that being like one of the first times I was like, man, this kid is super smart. And so, I mean, he's just continually done stuff like that over and over.
Was there ever a point where it was like, I'm sure at certain junctures it was like this, and not so much, like I said, that's like putting from your parents or anything like that, but like, this is old. Like, this is like, like I am intelligent in my own right. Like, I may not be hitting all the marks that he's hitting, but it's like, oh, okay, like, calm down. Whether it's like teachers or whatever.
I don't know. I don't, like, looking back, I don't feel like there was a comparison. I think they always, like, looking back, like, my parents, they were always at every football game, every baseball game.
Right.
Anything I ever did, they were always super supportive.
Sure.
So I had to imagine, like, they just knew we were different dudes.
Right.
And, like, even when it got to music,
totally,
they would come to Coos Cafe. Like, for those of you who don't know, it was like an abandoned house.
Totally.
It was an abandoned squatter dwelling.
It's true.
And my molecular biologist mother and librarian father would come to punk rock shows there because I was working with this band.
Because you were affiliated. Right.
Totally. And so I think they just always, they knew I was going to do something different, and we're always loving and supportive in it. And I'm super thankful for that.
Because it is always that weird role of like, what does a parent do from the kid's passion standpoint? It's like, especially when you have two living beings under your roof, like they're both going in completely different directions, and you're just like, well, we're gonna support both of these things, like whatever that actually means.
And they had to have had some really terrifying scares. I mean, I was in a band called Numbnuts.
Sure.
Right? Like, how do you tell your friends my son is in a band called Numbnuts? But I also remember at the same time, years later, after we did the first the Thrice deal with Island, where I got to basically buy a house at 24, 25, and my dad going to work and being so proud his kid was doing something
Right.
That enabled him to buy a house and like was doing well.
Totally.
And so they probably had all the ups and downs that a parent can have, I can imagine. So they've been awesome through it all. Yeah.
And so when you were, as you were alluding to earlier, and you're, matriculating through high school and involved in all these random things, was your path, because like you were saying, you went to junior college and stuff, were you just basically like, I need to do something with music, or did you have other aspirations in your head that you wanted to jump to?
Kind of like you pointing out the dichotomy and everything, that was always there. So I knew my interests and my passion. Like I always loved history. I did always love learning. I've always, from what I can remember, I've just loved reading and exploring and being curious. And I've also always loved. Not always loved. I always felt like some kind of call to ministry in the church. And so at the time I had this thing with school where I was like, well, I do enjoy learning and I feel like I want to go that route later. But I also have this thing that's right in front of me of like, I have this passion for music and independent music and creating and helping people create. And so there was always this tug back and forth. And so I'm trying to remember. Mm-hmm. There was when I was at Concordia, that was when there was a very distinct kind of like division in the path of like, I was in school as a pre-seminary major.
Right.
And I could go that route or, and I know, I mean, we'll probably get there in a few minutes, but the option of like, now I need to do music full time. And so,
you had to make that decision. How did you even get clued into kind of, independent music in general, via like how obviously popular ska was at that time? Like, or was it?
No, I was thinking about this last night. I'd totally forgotten.
Yeah.
Do you remember that band Vitamin L?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, they're horrific.
Yeah, not a very good band.
I know Dave still books at the Yost, and we had some interaction for work stuff a few years ago, and so we've been friendly ever since. But I distinctly remember I must have been 14 or something.
Okay.
My parents took us to some street fair in Fullerton,
and
Vitamin L was playing in some tent.
Sure.
Like it was. I don't even know if it was a pop-up tent or what it was, but they were playing in it, and they had like it was like some kind of it was like Voodoo Glow Skulls, kind of like this. Hybrid punk rock, like ska thing. And it was they had a trombone, and they had something in it. I don't know. It was like punk rock with a horn.
Right, some brass, right.
I just remember thinking, like, what is going on right now?
Right.
This is bizarre, and I like it, but I don't know what to think about it.
Totally.
And that was the first time where I was exposed to anything like that. And then my first show I was a Christian kid, so my first show was MXPX, right? Like it was like kind of like the obligatory first show.
Of course, right.
And so those were kind of
that kind of pushed you.
Kind of pushed me into it. I mean, but it went really quickly. I've always been kind of like I said, I've always been like really curious and like a voracious, I don't know, learner. I hope.
Yeah.
But I remember like even writing home. Actually, independent music.
Yeah.
I distinctly remember the first time I heard "Smells Like Teen Spirit."
Okay.
For sure. In 8th grade, someone gave me a cassette of Nevermind, and it just destroyed me.
Right.
Like I remember thinking, like, what is this?
Yeah,
totally blew my mind. And so I just remember, when I was like 12, 13, 14, riding my bike to Tower Records, buying albums. Like at the time, it was like Metallica, and Justice for All, and Ride the Lightning and all that stuff, and like coming home and I would pore over the liner notes, like who produced this, who engineered it, where did they record it, who's the management. I mean, I was 14. Who needs to know that stuff?
No,
you don't need to know that stuff.
Not at all.
You need to know what time Pony baseball practice.
Right.
I was always just devouring that stuff, and so that's kind of actually probably what got me more into independent music. It kind of like set the table for me to actually then experience it.
Sure. It was kind of but it was definitely the all-consuming moment of just like, oh, this is it.
Yeah.
I found this.
Totally.
And so then like, did you, as you were joking about earlier, where it's like, you started a ska band, and was it one of those things like you had aspirations to be like, this is going to continue like past high school, like we're going to be a thing, we're going to do it as hard as possible? Or was it just kind of like, oh, ska bands are hard because you have like 9 people in the band, like trying to manage.
Yeah, but at that point, you're not thinking about
No.
where's the income going to come
No,
from?
right.
Like,
Yeah, not a division of that,
Totally.
but just like a sheer logistics of like,
Yes.
we have to show up here and like, is everybody going to be here? Like,
Yes, which with musicians in and of themselves, that's a difficult thing, and then you
right.
multiply the numbers, and it becomes
Totally.
impossible. No, it was just fun.
Yeah.
It was fun. We're just making music with friends, and it's terrible. And
Right.
it's embarrassing, and
Sure.
you look back on it and I cringe. But at the time, it was fun.
And it was definitely like, it was so of the moment because it was so like, you guys were plugged into shows that you can guarantee at least 200 people are going to be there.
Yeah, we were on the first show that sold out at what was then Public Storage.
Right.
What is now Chain Reaction. It was like us and RX Bandits and
Probably
the
Grover's
Hippos.
Headache.
No,
Oh,
the
the
Hippos.
Hippos, sure.
Totally. Who I didn't know that Ariel. I don't remember his last name. Huge producer now.
Oh,
The singer-
really?
Yeah, totally. He's done
didn't know
like
that.
tons of crazy stuff. Anyway, so at the time it was fun, but it was also for me the time when I learned I'm terrible at music.
Sure.
And so I could wrangle all of them, but
Right.
I couldn't sing to save myself.
Sure.
I couldn't.
You were like, okay, I can see where my talents might lie.
Well, I can see where they definitely don't lie.
Right. Which is not
Yes.
in performing this music.
No, it was horrific. And so I started to just, it started to just kind of fade out after about a year and a half. And,
Yeah.
But I had a much clearer sense of like, hey, I love this, but this aspect of it isn't for me. And
Right.
so
I'm not a performer.
no, and I had been, every band has the business guy, right?
Right.
And I had always been kind of like that guy. Like I was the one who was booking all the shows and making
Sure.
sure we're getting merch on time and like all that stuff. Anyway.
You were the logistics hustle man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the one who kept it going longer than it needed to. Yeah.
Which is such that's such an important point of like a high school band when you do have like a person who is so like driven to not like make it successful, but just be like, yeah, this is still good, and everyone else is as long as Nick's doing it, that's fine, I guess.
It went on longer than it needed to, that's for sure.
Right. Another sort of inflection point in you jumping into my life again was when you were working at Time Bomb Records. We hadn't spoken in a while. Like this was a good year and a half or so. I don't even know how you got my home address, but you got you got it. But you sent me the Sunny Day Real Estate record, that Time Bomb.
Well, I think there was actually a piece of the story between those two.
Okay.
But Green Records.
Yeah, that's true. You were working there.
So
You're right.
when I worked at Green, you were working at Bionic, I think, right?
I think so, yeah.
Around that time. But that was another like really important part for me of independent music.
That's true. Working at the
working
record store,
with
right.
Andy Green and Ron Martinez and Mike Cheese, I mean dudes who had been living in independent music for I don't know, a decade or more.
Totally.
By the time I got there,
Totally.
And who were just really gracious and nice and helpful and taught me a ton about music and gave this again the Christian surfer football playing punk rock liking ska band kid a chance to work at like a really cool credible record store.
No, that's very true.
And,
yeah.
So that was, I think we had some interaction at that time for
That's
sure
true,
because
that's
you were doing
true.
Taken, and that's how the Thrice guys and I met, and so that was a really important piece for sure.
But you were working like Time Bomb was around that same time. Like you left Green.
I left Green to go to Time Bomb.
Okay. So Time Bomb. So you randomly sent me the Sunny Day Real Estate record. And it was like months before it came out. I was just like, all of a sudden I was like, "What package? What is it?" And I opened it. I was like, "What? This? What? This is the new Sunny Day Real Estate record?"
Yeah.
Like, and it was like a note. It was like, "Hey, like let's get together sometime for lunch or something like that. Come down to the office or whatever." And it was at that time that's when I noticed that you obviously had the ambitions to obviously like want to manage bands and like want to like take this into a career path. And that was when you were just like, hey, come meet the Thrice dudes and like, let's go see Rufio at the Showcase Theater and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that was the kind of the time, like you were talking about that sort of fork in the road?
Mm-hmm.
Was that around that whole time where you made that decision?
The fork actually came after that, man.
Okay.
The time at Time Bomb Rebel Waltz was really, really formative. Jim Garno, who was the head of both of them, is one of the most respected music industry executives. And I just loved his approach, man. He was like, I don't want to go to LA. I don't want to be a part of the LA scene. I'm just going to set up shop here in Laguna Beach.
Right.
And if you want to come talk to me, just come on down here.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I don't want to go to LA.
Right.
And so he created this incredible business. And the other thing I loved about it was like he did it with bands from Orange County.
Yeah.
Like everyone that he worked with was homegrown,
It's
which I really respected. And he had this. He was just a really smart, again, gracious person in my life who was a really, I don't know, man, successful, respected, just brilliant dude, but who would take time to, like, you know, when I wasn't scared of him,
right.
teach me some stuff, which was rad. And then, you know, Pete Jaberga and a few other dudes. I mean, I just remember, like, at that time, you know, when I showed up and Jaberga made me watch Swimming with Sharks with Kevin Spacey. Right? And his whole point was, watch this so that you will shut up, listen, and learn. And I kind of just took that as like, yeah, I'm 19. I should just shut up and listen and learn.
What were you hired to do there?
I was the assistant to the publicist and radio promotions staff. And so Rebel Waltz was the management company. Right. And they managed No Doubt and Social Distortion and The Offspring and Tony Hawk at the time. And then Time Bomb was the record label, and they had Sunny Day Real Estate and No Knife and Social D. I think so. It was an amazing experience because I got to see how international massive artists were managed and what that took to do that. And I also got to see the independent side of things. It was just an amazing.
That's true. You got to see label and management. Yeah.
And so. That was just a really formative time for me. And so, I mean, Jaberga I would go to shows with him all the time. He was the A&R guy.
Yeah.
And I would just absorb.
Right.
I would literally just be quiet and ask questions and just learn and learn and learn. And it was fun, man. It was a lot of fun. But it was during that time that Andy Green from Green Records sent me Identity Crisis.
Right.
And I remember sitting at my desk. I had this beautiful, incredible old. It was an office that was in this old fire station,
right?
And it was just an amazing office. I remember sitting there at my desk and putting in Identity Crisis and listening to that first song and just getting chills, almost like I did for Nevermind.
Yeah,
where I was like, I love this.
What are these?
Totally, and I've always been driven by belief. Mm-hmm. I've always been like, I believe in this and let's make it happen. And I just remember like in that moment listening to Identity Crisis going like, I believe in this and I love this and I'll do whatever I can to help this happen.
Right.
And so I'd known Dustin a bit from Green because he took my place when I left.
Right.
And they used to bring in First Impressions, their EP.
Awful EP. So
yeah. So I'd reach back out to him and we connected, and I basically I said, I'll work for free, man.
Yeah.
Like, here's what I would love to do. What do you think?
Sure.
And so we just started like that, man.
Your story from that sort of management perspective is so unique just because it's like, you know, of course, a lot of managers, like whatever, it's like, you know, they either like whatever, especially this day and age, it's like they join a collective where it's like they're part of like, you know, 6 other managers or whatever. And then there's still people that do identify like one young band and they kind of, you know, rise with them. Mm-hmm. But that story is much less common like than just joining an agency or whatever. And so it was like watching you guys, like, you know, I always try to put things in context for people because it's like, you know, that's what the internet is devoid of, is context. Mm-hmm. So it was like, you know, in the early 2000s when Thrice was at the absolute epicenter of all the major label weirdness of just like, like we can take a gamble on these bands and like we're, you know, when I say gamble, it's like, you know, Island being like, okay, yeah, we're going to sign Thrice and Thursday. And like, this is going to be, you know, the next Nirvanas. And like, you know, I'm sure you've heard ridiculous hyperbole placed on the bands in boardrooms. Yeah. With, you know, as the sort of, you know, management career was still like, you know, in its infancy. I mean, you'd been doing this for a few years now, but you were, you know, you hadn't swam at that level, so to speak.
No, I mean,
was it? I mean, I presume there's certain mile markers in your head where you were just like, oh my, like this is terrifying. Like, what are we doing here? But you had to be confident because
the step even getting to that though is before they ever generated all the interest that they did, you have to remember people didn't like them.
No.
Like it was so hard for them to get a show.
They didn't have a home anywhere.
No, they had no home. Like all the like straight edge hardcore Huntington Beach. What was that whole crew? Like the
Monster Crew.
The Monster Crew. Like, that whole thing. Like they were like, what are these dudes doing singing and not beating people up?
Right.
And then all the like punk rockers were like, why are they screaming at us? And so they were in this really weird void where they weren't really welcome anywhere, but it also kind of enabled them to play
with everybody.
With everybody.
Yeah.
And so those early days were hard. I mean, they were definitely hard. You know, lots of shows at Coos, lots of shows at Chez Cafe, Showcase, a bunch of stuff like that. So that's why I had gone back to school, because it was hard. It was working. Like they were, I believe at the time they were assigned to Hopeless.
Sure. Like you felt the upward momentum.
Subsidy. Sure. Yeah. There was momentum, but I was like, this isn't gonna like I believe in this and I love this, but it's not gonna support us anytime soon. And so I was like, well, I'll go back to school and I can do both at the same time. And that's when it blew up, because right when I went back to school is when Illusion of Safety came out. Right. It was almost like a month difference. And so I'm in my dorm room at Concordia University here in Irvine, and getting calls from Leor Cohen, like the head of Island Def Jam, and Jason Flom, the head of Atlantic, and the heads of Capitol and Sony and Columbia. Like everyone's calling my dorm room. Like in between classes, I'm taking these calls, and I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Right.
But I did two things. Okay. One, I had a really good team. An informal team, people that I'd worked with that I could bounce ideas off of and like get guidance on. And so I just availed myself of smart people and just said, hey, help me with this. Help me do my job well for this band that I love and believe in. Right. I want to do really well. So they did. And we had a great lawyer. Scott Bradford was amazing. Sure. And so we just had this really good team that was able to weather it. And that was awesome. Not just weather it, but I mean, man, it went awesome. Yeah. And the second thing is I grew a beard. I grew a beard to look older. Like I remember.
Wow, that was
totally. That was why I ever grew a beard, was because I was in over my head negotiating with these people that were more than twice my age, and I was like, well, I don't want them to think I'm a complete kid, so I guess I'll grow some facial hair. And
this will create the illusion.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I've experienced some stuff. Like I've seen some things.
Yes.
Not as much as you, but I'm still. Yeah. We can be in the same room.
Yeah. And it was a really unique, awesome experience.
Yeah. As far as your relationship to the band, because it was like, you were, for all intent and purposes, like the fifth member, and not in the creation aspect of it, but it was like, there's always this weird notion of managers being like this, evil puppet master pulling the strings, and it was like, oh, well, management told me to do this, so I guess we'll do this, But like that, you never had that vibe.
No, I mean, I think it goes back to kind of where you started. Like I've always seen myself more as a facilitator and a helper, and so I viewed my role as, what does the band want to do? Like, what's their vision? Mm-hmm. Where do they want to go? What do they want to create? And how can I help that happen in the best way possible?
Right.
And so I would give pushback. I would help correct where it was needed. But by and large, I viewed my job as, how do I put together the best team and the best circumstances so that these people are that I love and believe in are successful.
Right. And so it was like, after everything had not subsided, but after, you guys signed to Island, and, the records that you put out with them, not commercial successes like the label had wanted, but you guys were continuing to grow. Yeah. Was it one of those things where it was, in the kind of, major label story tradition of, was it difficult to like work within that system just because it was so massive? Or was it like, no, we felt like we had already walked into a good situation because we, ultimately they paid a lot of money for us to be here in the first place. Mm-hmm. So was it difficult for you to kind of navigate that, being the mouthpiece of the band?
The one who had to break all the bad news about everything we won't do. Totally.
Hey guys, we can't do this. We can't do that.
It wasn't. And honestly, like looking back, that was some of the stuff that I'm most proud of the Thrice guys, that I really always respected them for and was proud of, was that they didn't make decisions based on money.
Yeah.
They made
Yeah,
decisions.
you didn't feel like they did dumb stuff.
No, they didn't.
Right.
They based everything on the art, the craft, the music, and their fans. And so, I mean, I distinctly remember Visu. You know, they had done Artists in the Ambulance, and that did well.
Yeah.
And opened a lot of really good doors for them. And then Visu came around, and it was like, all right, well, how are we going to follow this up?
Right.
And I distinctly remember there was a moment where they had to choose. They were meeting with a bunch of producers.
Sure.
And their choice was between Howard Benson, who had produced Hoobastank.
Of course.
And
that was pre My Chemical Romance, like
totally.
Yeah.
I mean, no, actually, it wasn't. He had
done.
Yeah, it was after their
Cheers.
first.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
and so I mean, he had done these massive radio single records, and Steve Osborne, who nobody had heard of, but who had done U2 and Peter Gabriel, and a bunch of other stuff that's a little more eclectic.
Sure.
And I remember the label obviously pushing for
let's get Howard in here.
Yes, let's get Howard in here and make sure that, you know, there's a massive radio song. And we had to put our foot down and be like, we're going to go with Steve. And I still, that was one of the harder decisions, because you're like, in my mind, that was one of the harder decisions, because it was like, we are choosing not commercial success. We are choosing to do what we believe in, though it might come at a cost.
Sure.
And I still, I think it was the right decision. I love Visu, and I love the direction they went after that.
Oh, totally.
I mean, it's incredible.
Well, it's like the legacy that the band leaves. Like, you guys chose to focus on that rather than, you know, whatever. If you went
rather than immediate success.
Totally.
Yep,
Because
totally.
who knows, whatever, in 3 years, people would look at that particular potential Howard Benson record and be like, oh yeah, that was kind of a misstep. Or it could have propelled them into something even larger, and then they would, you know, they could have lost their sort of artistic vision and just be like, oh, I guess we're just another band, you know.
Totally.
Obviously, prior to, you know, Thrice being on Island and stuff like that, Subsidy and Hopeless existed that charity structure existed, and it was well respected.
Yeah. And so when the opportunity came, you know, early on, again, this was probably 2000 when they signed to Hopeless Subsidy. We had met with Revelation.
Oh yeah.
And I can't remember.
Weren't you guys talking to Nitro at one point too?
Might have been.
Maybe.
I don't remember. Again, my memory is pretty spotty.
Yeah.
But I do remember the guys the Thrice guys specifically chose Subsidy because, again, like, they were making decisions not based on money, but on what they believed in, and there was an opportunity to say, well, we can use the gifts that we have to create great music for the sake of music and for the sake of our fans. And while we do that, we can benefit other people who are in really difficult circumstances. Like,
sure.
Let's do it.
Right.
And so, I mean, that was, again, one of the decisions they made that was based on their convictions, their belief. That was really hard at first. I mean, there were, at the very beginning, I remember there were times when the checks that were being cut for the charities were bigger than the checks that were getting cut for the royalties.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Just because the way that the
deals
were structured,
right?
The charities always got paid.
Sure.
And the band didn't always get paid.
Right.
And so that was honestly very early on really hard.
Right. Obviously,
it
as
flourished.
time, right?
Totally.
As time goes along, sure.
I think they ended up raising over $1 million for which is incredible.
Totally.
Because you start thinking, like, at some point, the business was doing well enough that it just started happening on its own on the side.
Right.
And it ended up benefiting, single moms and abused kids in Fullerton and cancer research and was it like a writing a literacy program?
Oh,
for,
sure.
Kids that 826.
826,
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And so, again, one of the things they did based on conviction that was very difficult at first, but was the right decision down the road. And
Right.
you mentioned that having to go in and as the manager and have the hey, here's the thing we're not going to do, or here's the thing we really want. It's something I do remember having multiple conversations about album packaging.
Oh,
like,
Sure.
You remember, I don't know if you remember the first Artist in the Ambulance packaging.
Yeah, totally.
Matt
You had,
Moss,
you had cards, right?
Matt Moss, who is the bassist in Cold War Kids. Cold War Kids was originally a design group that he had.
Right.
And they designed it. It was basically like 12 or 13 individual cards that slid into a die cut cardboard bag. I mean, I don't know how much it cost, but I can't believe they let us do it.
Right.
But we did, the first 100,000 units were that packaging. But those were fights that we were constantly having. Like, we want to create something that is substantial and beneficial and beautiful and
it's so cool because you guys had the clout and the cachet in order to push back on that stuff and ultimately get it to be approved because they were just like, but like these guys are the thing now. Like, I mean, I could just see, like, especially with my record label mind working, of just like, well, but we got to keep these guys happy. Like, we got to, like, we can concede on this, whatever. It's another like 8 cents a unit or whatever. Like, but ultimately it was like you guys could push back on that stuff, and that's it. It's an important lesson to learn of like the battles that you can probably fight and the ones you're just like, we shouldn't push back. Like, is this that important to them?
We had a lot of those.
Right.
Yeah.
As your management company started to grow, it's like so many people, when they start something on their own, don't ever consider the idea of like, hey, like, I can't wait to be a boss. This is going to be rad to have like employees and like it's going to be really fun to manage people. And it's like, no, like most people like don't have that consideration or aren't really skilled in that specific trait, of. And so like as the management company started to grow and things were really, not only hitting with Thrice, but every single one of your bands had success on whatever level that they were trying to achieve. Was it difficult to kind of expand and still be, I guess, satisfied yourself?
I think it was incredibly satisfying. And also very unsatisfying. So on the satisfying side, again, going back to the idea of team, in addition to kind of like that like helper, facilitator, defender, advocate kind of role I play, I think I can also usually pretty clearly see the big picture and where pieces fit and how can we get to where we need to get. And I can usually see it clearly and strategize effectively to get there. But there's a lot of other things that I'm really weak in. And so I've always loved team and bringing in people around me that complement. And so like we did. I mean, like Kenny O'Leary, a super good friend, so talented, still manages Thrice now. Yep. And then Brent and Brett and Chris Venn. I mean, it was just a great team of really smart, passionate guys who were all like-minded in their approach to management. That it wasn't a dictatorship. Who's some kind of like Lou Pearlman management style. It was much more of a, hey, we're in this together, we're just gonna fight through it. And so it was really satisfying in what we built, in the way that we did business, in that, I mean, all of our bands basically went from every single band that we had, from, Thrice to Rufio to Matt Costa to Cold War Kids, to Vedera, all went from the garage, like really like practice space garage, to major labels, international touring, and doing and creating what they wanted to create. And so that to me was very satisfying. But the unsatisfying part would be more of, at the time, putting my entire like worth and value and all of that into how we were doing. And that's crushing,
Well, because that swings on a daily basis.
It totally does. I mean, you're putting your entire identity into something that is based ultimately on the whims and tastes and fashion of others. Like, it's a really precarious situation. And at the time, I didn't see that clearly. At the time, it took a few. We'll get there, but it took some circumstances for me to see just really how unfulfilling and
how you couldn't anchor yourself to that.
I couldn't,
right.
And it's it's funny. I remember speaking of team, Andrew Ellis, who I just love that dude.
Right.
He was
your booking agent.
A booking agent, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Who is we used to go. I would go into when I was again when I had grown a beard to look older, and I would have to when I would tour with Thrice in the van because it was just the five of us. I would go to settle a show at the end of a show,
right?
And if the booker, if the promoter was being really shady about something on the contract, and I didn't know exactly how to approach it or how to resolve it, I would just look at them and I would say, "Hold on a minute," and I would call Andrew and get him on the phone, and I would just say, "Andrew wants to talk to you," and to watch them quiver, just quiver of what was going to happen.
Right.
He was always this kind of big brother figure for all of us, and so I loved the dude. I learned so much from him. But what was interesting about the team part of it, and what we're talking about with the fulfillment is, for a dude like Andrew who was known as kind of like a gruff,
no nonsense
dude. There was a period in the music industry part where I don't know. I think I was probably depressed. I was really, really just down.
Sure.
And the only person who asked how are you doing was Andrew Ellis.
Really?
And I just remember that we went on a walk near my house in Orange, and he was just like, "Dude, what's going on? And how are you doing?" And it was just again, just going back to that team and that friendship and that camaraderie and
it came from an unexpected person to
totally.
Who wouldn't be typically quote unquote sensitive to other people's issues and be like, "Hey, dude," and you're like, "Whoa, this is coming from you."
Totally, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
So I mean, a lot of the time in New Noise was filled with stuff like that. That was just kind of our community of people. It was a really really good group.
And so then, as you started to, like you were alluding to earlier, that sort of inner calling that you had been, you put one aside, you put your ministry work to the side while you obviously explored the music stuff. And then once that call started to become more strong and you started to have to make the decision to step away when you did from the management stuff, you were stepping away at a time where it was like, you could have continued to do that for 10 plus years, if not longer. That could have parlayed into a life-spanning career, but you obviously chose not to do that.
Yeah. So why? A few things. I think a few things. One, I always knew it wasn't an old person's business. I remember when I was 19 and working at Time on River Waltz, my boss, Jack Isquith, he had, from what I remember, he had 2 kids that were the oldest of anyone in the office. And from what I remember, most everybody wasn't married, or they were just getting married very late in life, or they didn't have kids, or they were divorced, or something. It just wasn't I didn't see a really good home work balance at all,
Right.
And I remember saying to Jack, I was like, "Hey Jack, how come you have a normal family, but no one else does?" And he was like, "Nick, what other job requires you to be at a bar at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night?"
Right.
And I remember that at 19 being like, okay,
oh yeah,
I probably won't be doing this past 30.
Sure.
It was just my thought.
Right.
So that was always kind of in my mind.
Right.
The exceptions to that rule are people like Rick Rubin,
right,
or Cohen, people who are millionaires who were vanguards of a whole musical genre.
Right.
That wasn't us, and
right.
so I just had a reality check there. I knew that wasn't going to be there. And then the other part of it is, I kind of already mentioned, just coming to realize just how much of myself in that time, while I am so proud of so much that we did,
of course,
there was a lot of it personally that I could be really self-important,
sure.
Don't you know who I am?
Of course,
Nick Bogardus, New Noise manager, whatever.
right.
And I could be really manipulative because the manipulation is the dark side of that gift of being able to gather people, right?
Totally.
Like, people can feel used or taken advantage of. And,
Right.
and so there was just so much. I mean, I distinctly remember, and I've actually used this illustration in sermons on Sundays. Like I distinctly remember walking into industry parties in LA and like thinking as I walked through the door, who do I need to meet to get done what we want to get done?
Right.
I mean, which is another way of saying like, who can I use tonight?
Of course.
Right.
Totally.
And that's just like, a lot of that just goes assumed. All of it's encouraged, and all of it was just really corrosive to me because it feeds into my own sinful nature of like wanting to be awesome at the expense of everybody else.
Totally.
And so that period basically, again, putting all of your identity on something that is on how you're performing, especially in an industry that is based completely on perception.
Oh, right.
Built in me a duplicity, a complete duplicity between who I said I was and what the reality of who I was.
Right.
And so I was saying, yeah, I'm a Christian and I'm going to church, but the reality for a lot of people who knew me during that time was I didn't.
Yeah,
they wouldn't know. Like,
right.
I mean, the drinking, the girls, the partying, all that stuff. Like even like I mentioned, like just some of the ways it did business, like wasn't.
It wasn't anchored on
it. Was no, man. It was,
right.
and it was. I mean, it was corrosive to me. It was harmful and abusive and consumptive of other people, and it was just. I basically came to a point where I had to face that.
Sure.
I had to face who I was, and that's where, for me, that calling became more clear because it wasn't what was like a calling to like, well, I should I should become a pastor because I want to help people. Mm-hmm. Became a calling to, I want to become a pastor because I love Jesus and I know what he's done for me.
Right.
And it was two very different motivators. Right?
Sure.
And so for me having to like basically come to the end of myself, like I'm not as awesome as I say that I am. Totally. And in fact, there's a lot of parts of me that are really bad. And
right.
And I need God. I need a savior. Really kind of brought me out of the music industry.
Sure.
But then also the third factor. So the first was just the kind of like in the back of my mind, this isn't an old person's business. The second is actually coming to a real and deep and personal understanding of the gospel and God's saving of me.
Right. And
then the third is just my wife. I had met my wife. She was interning at Drive-Thru Records.
Right.
And so you can imagine what that circus was like.
Right. Yeah.
And so we had met through the music business, and we had known each other for a little while, but we started dating. We basically started dating a month before she was leaving for Mongolia because she was going to be in the Peace Corps.
Okay.
And basically, I was faced with a choice of like, I want to marry this girl. Like, I know I'm going to marry this girl. Like,
sure.
I can't not spend the rest of my life with her. And I'm going to have to go across an ocean to get her. These three things lined up where I was like, I just know it's time. And so I remember having conversations with all the bands. I remember distinctly talking to Dustin in his truck. We were driving somewhere, and I just remember being like kind of shaky because like I was telling my best friend like
you'd existed
for 8 years at that point,
right?
Like, doing this together. And I remember like him just being awesome and like, do it.
Right.
Do it. And I remember talking to Tepe and him doing the same thing, and Ed and Riley doing the same thing. And it was really hard. But it was absolutely the right choice. So
right.
We basically, I gave the business over to Kenny, who, again, is still just awesome and killing it.
Right.
And gave the business over to Kenny, sold our house in Orange, basically just turned my life upside down to
right.
move to Mongolia, which is just south of Siberia. Right. After I married my wife, we started dating in April. I planned the wedding while she was overseas. I would send her pictures of like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Dustin's wife actually tried on her wedding dress like to make sure it would fit because they were about the same size. And so I'd send her pictures like, do you like this one? All that.
Right.
So planned everything. She flew back, used her vacation time. We got married in January, the beginning of January. 3 weeks later, having given over everything else in my life, like we landed in Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia. It was negative 30 or 40. All of the moisture in my face froze.
Right.
Like my eyes, my eyelashes literally froze shut. My nose turned into like an icicle.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay,
This
is real.
This is where we're at.
Yeah, totally. And so we spent the first year and a half of our marriage over there. And that for me was the time when I actually started to really see,
Look at yourself.
Look at myself in reality of who I was even more deeply in that time in music. And because I remember telling people, we're in Mongolia, like, in between Russia and China, people don't go there. And
No.
it's a largely, historically a nomadic culture. And I remember people, asking me, missionaries who were there, they were the only foreigners. And Mongolians who could speak English, they'd be like, "Hey, what'd you do in America?" And I, have this little upswelling of pride of like, "Well, I own my own business and my own management company in the music industry, and I worked with these bands, and I name them."
Right.
And in America, people would be like, "Oh, that's awesome."
Oh, right.
Yeah, right. In Mongolia, they were like, "Cool."
Yeah.
Can you milk a cow?
Yeah.
Like they would have been way more impressed if I could have milked a cow and
Totally.
slaughtered a goat and
Right. Something practical.
totally could. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when I didn't get that reaction that I was so used to getting, I was like, but hey, you don't get how important this is.
Let me play you this.
Totally. It happened. It totally happened. And so it was the first time like those kind of strands of my identity started to get really unraveled.
Right.
And it was really helpful. It unraveled that part of my identity. It made our marriage a team.
Sure.
And it was like us. And like if you've seen the Born Identity, like the first Born Identity when they're like running through like Soviet block apartments.
Yep.
That was our apartment.
Right.
And it was like like 500 square feet of concrete.
Right.
With like a single light bulb hanging down from a wire.
Sure.
And so we'd tell the story of like your first year of marriage. For some people that can be pretty hard.
Yeah.
And when it's negative 40 outside and you're in a fight, you're not going anywhere.
Right.
Like, you're going to work that out.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like that first year and a half was that. And so we were away from our family and friends. We were away from everything that we knew in a completely foreign environment. Absolutely upside down from anything
Totally.
In a democratic society, like America, going to one that had only recently become democratic but was communist,
Sure.
in a largely, Christian culture, going to one that was atheist and Buddhist, and in a largely Western one going to a largely Eastern Asian culture. Like everything was upside down. And it was a real eye opener.
Right.
us.
Yeah. You stripped away everything and you just focused on obviously what was mattering to you.
Yeah.
Last point that I want to hit on that was what you're doing currently.
Yeah.
Like we've spoken about obviously with you planning a church here in Orange County, and what you've been doing and how we've equated it to DIY music, where it's like, because so many people, and honestly I never considered this until I'm watching you go doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
People have the idea of church, and they have either obviously positive or negative connotations with it, but they don't actually like look at the structure, like what does it take to like make this like into a place of worship, and like the parallels that I see of what it's like being a band in the garage and what you're doing is exactly the same thing. And I think I wanted to talk about it because like I said, no one considers that. People just think of church and it's just like, oh, it's this building I show up to, a bunch of old people in it, like this sort of stereotypical view of what a church means. And so applying the sort of DIY principles that you've been able to learn within everything you did with your bands and kind of applying that to what you're doing now.
Yeah. I think there are. There's a lot of the logistical and superficial similarities of just like what it takes to create a community. And there's that, a lot of the similarities there. There's also some deeper similarities.
Sure.
That you and I have talked about before. And that is, in everything, kind of, I've already mentioned that identity piece a few times. But my friend Bill Clem was a pastor up in Portland. He had basically laid out a really helpful picture of what it means to be made in the image of God. Like that as Christians, we believe that every human being is made in the image of the God who made everything. And part of whether or not you believe that, hear me out on these different parts, because I think it's insightful.
Okay.
Is that part of what that image of God means is that everybody has an identity in something. Everyone is worshiping something, and everyone is in community with a group of people, and everyone is on mission to do something. Like every human being has those four parts of them, which we would say comes as a result of being made in the image of God. And so for example, when it comes to music, right? Like working in an independent record store, you get to see, like I got to see people come in and they would buy their first Offspring record.
Right.
And then they would buy a Refused record.
Sure.
And then maybe they would buy a Crass record.
Right.
And then they would just kind of like go down this slope, this entry point into like this deeper exploration of what was behind all this music. But as they did it, you saw like even their appearance change.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like you'd see some kid come in like a polo shirt, and 6 months later the dude has Liberty spikes and like and tattoos everywhere. And so taking that kind of like paradigm, like they were putting their identity in like I am into punk rock, or I am into independent music, and because my identity is in that, I worship these other people in the scene who are like the really truly DIY punk rock people, or these bands who have been doing this for so long, or whatever. Like you're worshiping something else out of it, and you're in community with other people who are like-minded, and you are on a mission to whatever, say what you were in Monster Crew, right? Talk about that. Like you're on a mission to enforce your straight edge Sharia law in Orange County. So everyone has these four aspects that they are looking for. And so as a Christian, I believe those things can only truly be found in God and Jesus. And so doing church is similar, but I think it's ultimately like leading people to what they're really looking for. Okay. And so, for example, have you watched comedians in cars having coffee?
Yes.
With Seinfeld, right?
Spectacular.
Right. First of all, how brilliant is the Patton Oswalt one when he goes to Handsome Coffee? Totally. I thought that was... So I love when New Yorkers rag on LA. Totally. Because it's so condescending.
It is.
It's so
like,
funny.
What are you doing out here?
Totally. Yeah. It's so funny. But have you seen the one with Michael Richards?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Incredible.
It made my heart just sad.
Totally.
Man. I mean, because you see these old friends, Michael Richards, who played Kramer, right? Who had this very public self-destruction where he went on this racist rant, right? And in the middle of a routine he was doing. And so you see these old friends who are sitting across the table from each other having coffee, and they get to this real vulnerable point, right? Which I had never seen reached in any of the other episodes.
No, not at all.
That show. It was the only real point where someone's heart was exposed.
I agree.
Where Michael Richards was like, "This was the most." I mean, I'm paraphrasing. I mean, basically, this was the most painful thing I've ever been through. Totally. And thank you for sticking by me. Yeah. Right? Like what he was saying, and it was like this incredible, heartfelt moment. And he was describing how everyone basically abandoned him, except for Jerry. And I don't know if you remember this, but like I was like, oh my gosh, this could be amazing. Like, what's he going to say? Like, help your friend out, right? Right. And I remember Jerry's response was something like, hey man, it's your choice to put that down, was basically what he said. Right. Basically it was like, get over it. Try harder to get over it. Right. And I just went, oh man, like, that's the worst advice you could give to somebody dealing with what he's dealing with. He's dealing with shame, right? Like Michael Richards is dealing with the fact that he had done something really wrong and horrific, but that as a result of that, he was labeled as unacceptable, contaminated, an outsider. And the only thing that dislodges that kind of shame is to be loved and accepted by someone greater than those who've abandoned you. Sure. And so in that moment, Michael Richards didn't need good advice, because that was just bad advice. Right. He didn't even need a comic to make him laugh. Like what he needed was the gospel, to be told that greater than the shame he's experiencing is the love of a God who has rescued him from that. Like to me, that is what going from the entertainment business and the music industry into the church looks like, and why I'm passionate about it. Right. So that's the deeper stuff for me.
Right.
And the logistical part, yeah, I mean, you mentioned like, it's like when we first started with Thrice, like you're doing all the flyering, you're doing all of the show booking, you're doing the website, you're doing the design. I mean, everything. I'm doing everything that I'm not skilled to be doing. Like,
Right.
I literally am using Keynote
Yeah.
to do design for online stuff. Like any designer with any kind of aptitude is probably throwing up on their desk right now.
Right.
That I'm using Keynote to do design.
Right.
But that's where we are, man. Like, and so for me, it is using the skills that you mentioned of like being an advocate and a defender and a gatherer and a helper to help people worship and grow as disciples of Jesus, and build a team to use their skills so that we can build a healthy church together.
Yeah.
You know, I think you mentioned the thing about most people's preconceptions about church.
Right.
And I think what's helpful to think about that is just like in music, maybe even going back to like the example just used, like just like in music, like if someone like came to you and they're like, man, I love punk rock.
Sure.
Green Day is amazing.
Yeah.
Like you'd be like, man, that's cool that you like that. Like,
Right.
and I think they're great. Like let's check this thing out, right?
Totally.
Like, let me introduce you to a few other things,
Right.
Or even scandals in punk rock or something like that. Like,
Oh, sure.
or, you know, people signing, like people who are in the independent music scene who signed to major labels for
Right. When selling out
sell
was a thing.
everything, like just completely sell out their soul, like for everything, right? Or they even think like, you know, like a Rage Against the Machine, where like they have this whole ideology that is in complete conflict with the reality of their business decisions, right?
Of course.
Anyway, looking at the abuses or distortions of something shouldn't tell you that what it is broken. It should tell you that there is a better design behind it that is being abused or distorted.
Right.
And so a lot of people's preconceptions about church or faith come from distortions or abuses that they have experienced, and that's sad and it's regrettable.
Right.
But I would hope that they would see that the abuses and distortions aren't the real thing. They should be indicators that there is something good behind it that has been warped.
Sure.
And so for us as a church, as a young church, I mean, we just started in January. Like, our hope is not to react negatively against abuses or distortions that we've experienced or seen around us, but much more to say like, okay, well, what is God's design for his people? And it's good design for his people. And how do we do that well for one another and for Orange County? And so for me, that's exciting.
Right. That's the motion forward. That's obviously like the you know mission that you are on.
Totally.
And you feel called to do as opposed to just existing, because that's what a lot of people obviously do from the context of, like you're saying, like leaving, you know, burning, like literally burning down one side of your life from, and then refocusing on something else. It's like that. It takes a lot of, you know, courage and trust to, you know, not in yourself, but in something that is greater than you to be able to move forward to that.
Totally.
That's why I wanted you on here, because I think it's such an important lesson of, regardless of where a person's at in their own walk of whatever faith or spirituality means to them, it's an important point to know that it's like you can come from these similar backgrounds of, you know, being attracted to a subculture. And like, this can exist. Like, you can do similar things that are directly applicable to like your faith, and
Totally.
And knowing why these things don't have to be, you know, corrupted by larger, you know, influences. Where it's like, you know, whatever people say, you know, whatever Christian hardcore, Christian punk, like that shouldn't exist. You know, it's like, well, that's not for you to say. Like, I
think, I mean, now that you mentioned like the integration of faith and basically like creation, like I think Christianity has like an incredible foundation and support and encouragement for cultivating, like the taking of raw resources and creating something new for the flourishing of others is like at the heart of the faith. And so, I mean, when you look at art and music and education and politics and all that stuff, like Christians did that because they felt a compulsion out of a God who has created himself, like to create good for other people around him. So I mean, like you had like, I mean, for centuries.
Right.
Christian art was like the greatest stuff in the world. They were creating beautiful things for the glory of God and the good of other people. They created music that was, I mean, incredible and lasting until this day. And education, like, I mean, Harvard, Yale, I mean, Princeton, like schools started by believers for the sake of creating something good. Like, so at the heart of the faith has always been like, create something for the good of others. And I think it's simple and it's awesome. So
no, it's an incredible point that sometimes gets, like you said, distorted and lost from that perspective.
Totally.
Well, I could not be more thankful for you hanging out and
thanks, Ryan,
diving into this. I knew it was going to be a fun one.
yeah. Thank you, man. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for being a good friend through all the years. I was coming in here and I was thinking, like, I've known Ray since high school. Yeah. So I've known him since high school.
Right.
I've known him through a ska band.
Yeah.
I've known him through the ups and downs of the music industry.
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
Totally. Right. We've known each other in all of our glory and unglory. Totally. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah. Thanks, bro.
So there was the conversation with Nick. I almost wanted to sing right there, but I didn't. So that's Nick in a nutshell. crossofchristoc.com. That is the church that he currently runs. Yeah, if you're in Southern California and you have any passing interest in religion and discussion around that, you should check it out because it's a pretty cool thing. Like I said, I really compare it to the early life of bands where you're just like, you're trying to build something. You're trying to get people to, pay attention and believe what it is that you're trying to do. So it's pretty awesome. And I'm just really glad that Nick is taking a risk and doing that on his own. So many cool things coming up. I'm just not even going to tell you because, I just get too excited. But next week, a really, really cool conversation. I'm not going to bury the lead. And the producer, as always, is Tom Richfield. And donate. Like I said, step it up. Until next week, be safe, everybody.